All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for swimming here through the endless rain for this event. We appreciate it. I'm Kristin. I'm the Chief of Party for the USAID-funded Atlas project, which is a climate change adaptation project. We host these monthly adaptation community meetings here. So we have a very good presentation today, which I'm going to not introduce. I'm going to let Corinne Hart from USAID introduce in a minute. But before we do that, just a few general things. As I say, these are monthly. They are usually on the third Thursday of each month. Next month, June, if we have one, it will be 1 week later on the 28th, which is the fourth Thursday of the month. But I say if we have one because for those who don't know, the Adaptation Futures Conference, which is an annual event, is going on around that time, in fact, that week in Cape Town, South Africa, and that's sort of pulled all the adaptation, or much of the adaptation critical mass of, intellectual capital, et cetera, there. So we've been having a little bit of a challenge finding a good presentation for next month. So stay tuned, and we'll see whether we have one. If we don't, then we will resume in July on the third Thursday. And for those who don't know, you can keep up with all of this by subscribing to the announcements of the ACMs at climatelinks.org, which is the public-facing USAID-sponsored website, all things climate change, both mitigation, adaptation, etc. So I believe that covers everything. Good, I got the thumbs up. I didn't forget anything. So with that, I will turn this over to Corinne, who will introduce our speaker, and then we will move on from there.
Great.
So Corinne, here you go.
Thank you.
Sure.
Thanks everyone for coming and for hosting us. My name is Corinne Hart, and I'm the Senior Advisor for Gender and Environment at USAID. I sit in the Office of Gender Equality and Women's Empowerment, and my role is to provide gender technical support and expertise to the environmental offices at USAID, particularly those in E3. So really focusing on climate change, forestry and biodiversity, land and property rights, and energy and infrastructure. And so I work very closely with the Global Climate Change team to help them identify ways to integrate gender, opportunities to amplify women's empowerment, impacts and opportunities. And I'm really excited that today we're going to be able to share more information about one of the programs that USAID is funding, Advancing Gender in the Environment. Lorena is going to go into it, so I won't give a lot of details, but just so you know who Lorena is, she's the Global Senior Gender Advisor for IUCN, the International Union for the Conservation of Nature, and she founded and does run the Global Gender Office at IUCN. She, if you're involved at all in gender and climate, you probably know her. She's one of the world's leading experts on this topic and is sought out by organizations all over the world to provide gender expertise into climate change programming. And her team, Lorena and her team, are supporting USAID in a wide range of new activities that we've been designing under AGENT, Advancing Gender in the Environment, to look at how to integrate gender into many different topics, including on climate, which she'll talk about, and really providing capacity building support, technical assistance to increase USAID's ability to better understand the knowledge gaps that exist in this nexus, as well as create knowledge products, research, conduct trainings, et cetera, to really build capacity. So she'll talk a little bit about that today, but she'll also talk about some of IUCN's past work on gender and climate and the success that they've had integrating gender into climate change programming, policies, the national and international level. So over to you, Lorena.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Corinne, for believing in us, and thank you very much for Chemonics and for the project Atlas to be here. So I have here part of my team. I have Celine and Ruta and Emmett. So even though I'm going to be the one speaking, this is a whole team that has been working in a lot of these processes, so they're going to join us on the Q&A part. So as Corinne was saying, the idea is to share with you what we have been doing under the AGENT program, but also share some other work that we have been doing on gender and adaptation and gender and climate change as a whole. But for those of you that do not know what IUCN is better known because of our red list. Species of red list, and that's what people, when you said, oh, I work for IUCN, that's what it resonates. But the interesting thing, and one of the things that we have been able to work so well at the national level, is that the Ministries of Environment are members of IUCN. We have government members and we have NGO members. So that is a very unique type of institution that has had this structure for more than 70 years. And as I said, it was created in 1948. So we are in our 70th birthday at the moment. Despite that fact that people think IUCN, crocodiles, rhinos, elephants, tree huggers, we have the longest record of any international environmental organization. We have had a gender program since 1984, or have been addressing issues. We are considered a center of excellency. For the past 20 plus years, we have been developing knowledge, and we have been developing the capacity of people to address and to understand these linkages. For example, in climate change, we have more than 15 years of developing not only training manuals for the linkage, but also we have developed that capacity of more than 2,500 decision makers to the Convention on Climate Change, and how to address them and how to work with them. We work globally, but we also work locally, and you're going to see some of those examples. Now, we think that gender actions needs to be responsive. This is not only about not doing harm, but it's trying to really do better, understanding what those gender gaps are and trying to do something through our initiatives and projects to close that gap. And also, we also think that gender equality is a driver for transformation, and it's smart thinking for some of our processes. So as Corinne was saying, AGENT is this what we call a grant through E3. It's a 10-year grant. It started like 5 years. Now we have increased it to 10 years. It's designed to complement some of the emerging USAID environmental efforts, but we're trying also to generate knowledge, to create some of this motion when it comes to the value of gender equality, trying to fill some of these gaps. For example, 4 years ago, we created the first network to understand gender and big renewable projects on energy, which was very, very little understanding. We're working, for example, right now on gender-based violence and environment. What are the linkages? So we're trying to fill some of these gaps, and hopefully, as you can see, some of the work that we're doing under this adaptation project that I'm going to share is to apply them to programs and trainings within USAID, but this is also having a repercussion outside USAID. Example of the energy work, we could had, and we had had an impact on C4All, that is one of the biggest initiatives within the UN system on energy. So this is really transcending USAID work. Oops. Okay, that's faster. So as I was saying, some of our recent work has been on energy, but we're also providing support, like for Tropical Forest Alliance. We have a gender and inclusion strategy that is trying to do that. As I said, on GBV, trying to find those. And one of the most interesting works that we're doing precisely under AGENT is that building this evidence on adaptation and gender, and the identifying these gender vulnerabilities to overlay them with environmental fragility. Let me see if I can turn this around. Too many things at the same time. Okay. So this is one of the initiatives under AGENT. And this is something that Celine and Emmett and Ruta, who are the lead team, has been working. And it's precisely to try to make those linkages. A lot of people are working on vulnerability. A lot of people are working on fragility. And a lot of people are working on gender equality. So this initiative is trying to build them together and find that intersection between the three of them. We are doing a lot of research, trying to understand what will be those gender equality indicators that can be crossed with fragility and with vulnerability, and trying to really come up with a set of recommendations for that. So the team has been doing this incredible comprehensive desk review. We're working to determine those indicators, and hopefully we will be able to have like these hotspots, these maps that the people that are working on fragility are working on them, the people that are working on vulnerability are working on them, but we want to bring them all together to see how they look like. And then provide guidance to at least 10 countries, 10 missions from USAID, so that they can inform their initiatives and they can inform their projects of where can they concentrate based on these hotspots and mapping things. So the applicability, as I said, we're trying to develop these briefs, and hopefully it will help the climate risk management tools to be used. So there will be an immediate application of some of the knowledge that we are generating. Some other work that we're doing on climate change is called the CCCAPs, Climate Change Gender Action Plans. So far as IUCN, we have developed more than 25 CCCAPs worldwide, from Haiti to Dominican Republic to Bangladesh to Nepal to Mozambique, and 3 of them had been developed with the support of USAID. Those are the CCCAPs from Peru, the CCCAPs from Zambia, and the CCCAP from Dominican Republic that is being finalized. But what is a CCCAP? A CCCAP is a very, very interesting multi-stakeholder process. It starts, as you can see, it has 4 phases. It starts by understanding the data at the national level on gender, and what is the data that we have on climate change. And a lot of the things that our colleagues are trying to do, creating these hotspots, well, part of that is what we do also in the CCCAPs. I mean, what is the information on vulnerability, not necessarily fragility? What is the information that we have on agriculture? What is the information that we have on transport? What is the information that we have on disaster risk reduction? And do first that take stock, as we call it. In the process of doing that take stock, and this is 2010 was the first CCCAP that we developed, we understood that very fast that if you bring women or organizations that are working on gender equality and people that are working on climate change and you sit them in the same room, there is a tremendous amount of misunderstanding, not sharing the same knowledge, and it creates a lot of conflicts, especially for the women groups. Red for them is a color, nothing to do with climate change. IPCC, God knows what that is about. We use the word mitigation in a different way when we're working on climate change and in other things. So we understood very, very fast that we needed to have these first capacity building processes for people that were working on gender equality and women issues, a safe place to understand what climate change was about. And then once that happens, then you can seat them with the people that are working on climate change. But it's also very important that they could understood what the national climate change strategies were about and try to provide inputs to that process. You participated a little bit when we were in Nepal, right? In that process, and it was, Judy was with us, and it was very, very interesting, the type of movement that you get when they really understand, oh, these are the linkages between gender and climate change. And then once you are able to do that, Then you have these 250, 300 people workshops in which people from climate change, people from all the different sectors, transport, urban settings, agriculture, water, come together and decide what are going to be the type of gender and climate change initiatives that can be brought in. That is prioritized, and then those are national policy documents, and they are validated in different ways, like in the case of Peru, for example. They needed to be validated throughout all the different regions of Peru before the government can make it official. All the activities within the CCCAPs have this, what we call the right eyes for climate change. All the activities within the CCCAPs needs to be inclusive. We have been working in countries, for example, that the government said, we are not inviting the NGOs. Well, if you're not inviting them, we're not doing them. We're not inviting certain people from certain castes. Well, if that is not the case, we're not going to do them. So it really have to bring youth, different ages, religious groups, different castes to participate in this process. We're working on climate change, so most of the actions, not necessarily all of them, but they have to have an impact or do not have an impact in producing more emissions. They have to improve the quality of life. They have to be innovative. Move away from chickens and pigs and gardens. There is a life beyond the household when we talk about gender and climate change. Even though the household is important, you're going to see the type of activities that they're proposing. They have to increase sustainability, but they also have to impulse this transformational change. It's not about, again, as I said at the beginning, do not do harm, but trying to do better. And by that, they're all gender responsive. This is not about only bringing women and steering them in the cocktail and thinking that that is working with a gender perspective. They have to really identify which are those gender gaps and try through your actions to do win-win activities that have an impact on the work that we're doing on climate change, but at the same time can really improve the lives of the women and men that are involved in those processes. So this is, for example, one of, as you can see how that is laid out. You have, for example, the Peru CC Gap, how we started with these 20 plus women organizations or organizations working on gender equality, developed their capacity. Then they were part with other 100 plus women and men stakeholders in that third stage of the process. And those are the 6 priority sectors that the country themselves defines. And this is very important. Each CC Gap is done only upon the request of the government. We don't produce a CC Gap if the government doesn't request one. So that is important. And those sectors, if you visit any other of the CC Gaps, they vary from country to country. They're not the same because they're chosen in accordance with their climate change strategies, their national determined contribution documents, in the last ones that we have done, but they are embedded within the sectors in which they're working. So you can see Egypt, in which tourism is very, very important. Or you can see in the Dominican Republic, and that forest topics are important. Jordan doesn't have forest. It has water stronger than others. So it varies from country, and they are the one that selects the processes. And now those activities are being implemented in the case of Peru in different areas. But the interesting thing also of the example of Peru is that it was taken by the USAID mission itself, and it has helped them frame their national strategy. How do you call them? Their national programs. In the mission. They have a specific name. CDC.
Oh, the
CDC, yes. The country
development.
Thank you very much. So it's informing that. And so you start seeing how there is being. When you review, for example, Peru's National Determined Contribution document, they mention the CC Gap. They mention the same in Liberia and in Zambia. So this has been having an impact already in the work that is being done. Also, the CCCAPs has been possible because there has been an international movement, like the one that Corinne was saying. When we started in 2008, there was only one mention on gender on the conventions. Right now, we have 60-plus reference of gender worldwide within the Convention on Climate Change. It's now part of the Paris Agreement that gender equality is a guiding principle. And now we have a gender action plan for the convention that asks for these type of things. And this is serving as a model for other countries to develop CCCAPs. At the moment, we have 4 new requests. Pakistan, that is including their CCCAP in their readiness phase in the Green Climate Fund. We have Costa Rica that wants to advance a new CCCAP. We have the request from Honduras, and we have the request from Guatemala. And Colombia, in the latest days, have been expressing interest. We have Laos that is also interested in the process, and Myanmar. So this has been generating a lot of interest. We hope that in 4 or 5 years, we will have a little bit more than 50% of the countries worldwide with CCCAPs. It's at least what I can dream of. And we're good on our way with 25. So some examples of what have been coming out of these CCCAPs in relation to gender. So the first one is from Peru. I'm going to use some examples from the CCCAPs that have been funded by USAID. Is that in Peru, it was very clear when we were doing the CCCAP that they're having a tremendous problem with school starting in the same time of the year. Because when they start at national level, the parts in Peru that are in the lowlands are flooded right now. So they're saying we need to have a resilient school system in Peru. Schools cannot start at the same time. This is having an impact of boys and girls going to school. They really need to take into consideration, schools need to prepare the communities for climate change, how to adapt to climate change, and what is the role that schools can have. So they have a certification process. We have the women environmental whistleblowers in Liberia. One of the problems in Liberia, if you have follow the process of this country, 14 years of tremendous civil war, all their meteorological information was lost, and in their national strategy, they wanted to start putting these different systems. And when the women heard that, they said, but why don't you train us so that this meteorological system is in our hands? You can provide us with phones so that we can send the information back, but we can also use the phones to give us alerts when storms and other events are happening, because we have no access if it is through other systems. So this combination between collection of information, relationship with their EPA, that is their environmental protection agencies. Climate health kids in Mozambique. What happened in Mozambique, and it happens in many other parts of the world, especially in our developing countries, 80% of the medicine is depending on traditional medicine. But a lot of the new diseases that are coming to some areas, like malaria, they didn't have it before in some of the areas. So they want to introduce new plants to the healers and an understanding on how to identify some of these diseases and the use of new plants. So those are the climate change health kits. Waste Speaker Neighborhoods Alliance, that is also a project in Peru, even though Dominican Republic has it as well, Jordan has it as well. This collaboration between rich neighborhoods and waste pickers, and how you can create a better alliance. Water taxi network, even though you can see it as part of mitigation, it also have a very interesting adaptation. This is in Egypt. Egypt has a tremendous problem with transport. I mean, you can be within the city for 3 or 4 hours, and the majority of the People are the women really exposing themselves to the emissions of the buses. So the Ministry of Transport, with the participants, decided that a water taxi system for the Nile that is not used for public transportation could be something that will have increase the economic revenue for some of the women, could stop at the places that were needed for the women, closest to the mosque, closer to the market, closest to certain schools, low emission technologies. So these interesting situations that are there. And now we're talking with some of the banks so if they can finance that initiative. Finance fairs in Yucatan Peninsula in Mexico, because we're not only doing CCCAPs at the national level, we're now doing CCCAPs at the very local level. One of the most interesting one is in Sonora, in Mexico, where we work with the EDIs, the indigenous groups. It's the first CCCAP developed by an indigenous community and led by themselves for the Sonora region. Finance fairs is from Yucatan, in which they said that they don't have access nor to the resources, nor to the information. They want to know which are the funds that are available. They want to have the fairs in which women and men can show what they're doing, what their plans are. They need to understand who is the focal point, when are the concept those due, how do you write the outline. So they want to have finance fairs to address access. Backpack for Lives in Dominican Republic, when they analyze why women were dying in higher levels than men, they found out that women take a lot of time deciding what they're going to pack to run away from the houses, and sometimes they don't have enough time. So prepare backpacks for lives. Ready. They're there for the kids and what you need. You just need to grab them and go. And women forests, great examples from Peru and other parts where we're working. The Beast of the Leaks. That is also from Dominican Republic. Water supply, they have a lot of leaks. So this is the youth using social media to send Instagram and send photographs to the ministry that is in charge of looking after leaks. So they said, there is a leak in this place. In Spanish, it's called Las Fieras de las Fugas. It sounds a hell of a lot better than the beast of the leaks. Energy funds for new technology. So the CCCAPs are full of these innovative ideas that moves a little bit the boundary from other type of things. Other initiatives that we're doing very fast. We're also, we produce data. In 2013, and Ruta was who accompanies in this crazy idea of developing a gender and environment index. But one of the things when we were trying to develop the index, there was not enough data. So one of the things is that we transform the famous index in what we call right now the EGI, that is the Environment and Gender Information Platform, is to generate more data that help the governments make better decisions, we think, but it also helps us to keep a track and for monitoring and evaluation purposes. So this is, for example, some of the work that we do. We look at all the reports, the national biodiversity action plans worldwide, and we said, okay, how many are incorporating gender and how they are incorporating gender. And then we can come back and say, okay, we're going to do this and this work, and then we can see some of the differences. So this is, for example, how we use our data. We go back to the countries. These are 3 pilots that we did. Brazil, before we started the process, 0 mentions, Mexico 21, Uganda 18. We went through a process similar to the CCCAPs, building the capacity of women groups and groups working on human rights and gender equality. And after that process, you can see the difference on how gender is now being addressed in the national biodiversity action plans. This is some of the mapping that we're doing, also to work on forest landscape restoration. So we have been able to see what are the areas that our colleagues are planning to do forest landscape restoration, and we overlaid similar to hopefully the hotspot information, some of the gender information, and then you can see that if they want to work in this area, the majority of the population that they have are women-headed households. So if their projects doesn't have technical inputs and they doesn't really incorporate that population that they have, those projects are not going to be as effective and as efficient as they can. And with that, I'll thank you very much. Fast, but I don't know if the colleagues want to also say something else. No? Ruta, you want to explain a little bit where I'm at? No? Okay. Now all the questions are going to go to them. Doubts, complaints.
Sorry, we have webinar participants, so if you could speak into the mic for the webinar, that'd be great.
Thanks. I'm Lori Ashley. I'm independent. I was wondering, with your CCCAPs, are you, after they're completed, and it sounds like a really rigorous process in the country, are you seeing those being integrated into national climate policy, into the nationally determined contributions, into national adaptation plans and that sort of thing? Once you're gone, do those plans and ideas continue to be integrated into those sorts of policy decisions and documents?
We have a mixed bag. We have countries that have really, for example, in the case of Jordan, taking the CC Gap, transform it, and they got $10 million for the implementation of the CC Gap. We have other countries that they have taken PITs and pieces and they have incorporated, for example, in their national climate change strategy. One of the things that we learned in this process is that once we develop the CC Gap, we need resources for the implementation. Because the first CC Gaps that we developed, we had resources for the document itself. And one of the things is that we're not engaging anymore in developing a CC Gap unless we have assurance for money for implementation. So that is, it has, but it needs a little bit more of push. And we have had donor meetings, but some countries have been taking them in the NDCs, as I said, very well stated. But still, transforming that for GEF funds and Green Climate Fund initiatives and CEF proposals, that is something that we still have to work on. Yes, Judy. So nice to see you again.
Thank you. Very nice to see you, and many congratulations to you and the team on this work. It's really, really fantastic. So I have a question. I was working in Nepal for 5 years on the Hariyuban program, which was doing conservation and climate change. And we started off doing a lot of adaptation plans. This was more at local level than you're working at. But we
on the LAPAs.
On the LAPAs and CAPAs, so community level as well.
Yeah.
And what we found was we produced really good plans, but like you, there wasn't always money to implement them, and there wasn't always buy-in from all the sectors that we needed, including local government. And so what we started doing by the end of phase one was mainstreaming them into local government planning in order to get ownership of them and to get them, funded and to make them more sustainable so that they would continue to be mainstreamed into planning. So for us, the LAPAs and CAPAs were kind of like a passing phase, if you like. They were really important to do, and they raised awareness and they brought people together, and we also integrated gender. But we're now making them become part of local planning, and similarly with the NAPs, part of national planning. So did you see a sort of a transition process for CGAPs as well like this? Are you finding a similar thing but at national level?
Yes, that is the reason that I said that we're now, in the case of Mexico, that is such a huge country, we're going more and more and more local, like the CC Gap that we did in Sonora, the CC Gap that we did in Yucatan. Definitely. Those national, huge guiding documents needs to have resonance at the local level. And that is a challenge that needs to happen, and we're trying to move little and little more at that level. Also, who becomes like the godmother and the godfather of certain initiatives within the CC Gaps, because the CC Gaps are full of projects and full of ideas, but they need to be taken and hosted by a group, an organization that can take them to good port. As IUCN, we do have country offices, we do have regional offices, but we ourselves as a gender team do not implement on the ground because we have partners and we have institutions that are supposed to implement on the ground. But yes, definitely. And we start seeing the effect of this. For example, in Cameroon, we have a similar CC Gap, but only for red. You have this in Mexico, we have this in Uganda, we have this in Ghana. Thanks to that initiative in Cameroon, which was one of the countries in which women could not register land under their name, there was a red initiative. It opened the land legislation, and we were able to squeeze in, because of the activities in this red roadmap, similar to the CC Gap, but specific for that topic, work through our colleagues with the wives and the mothers of the chiefs that were the big ones that wouldn't want women, and they convinced them. And then accept that in the reform product of red, now women can have land under their name in Cameroon. So this is the navigation. This is really getting it down to things to really happen. Now the red initiatives are having better results thanks to women and men participating in these processes.
Could you speak a little bit more to how you do reconcile formal and national and state level law and customary and village council law? You just provided that example of the land tenure law, but could you speak a little bit more to, in terms of the climate action plan, how you do that?
Yes, well, I mean, Cameroon is a great example. We find it in different ways. Sometimes what we do is smart solutions. And I'll give you an example from Mexico. Even though the legislation in Mexico allow women and men to own land, there is a machismo, which is part of our Latin American culture, very well extended. And a lot of men migrate to other areas and to, before, more to the U.S., but I mean, they're migrating, and they leave the women behind with no possibilities of credit because they don't own the land. So what we have been doing with them and said, will you give the land in concession to the women for 90 years? And they agree. They're not losing the machismo. They're still the owners, but they give it under concession. So a lot has to do, how do you work those cultural taboos? Like in the case of Cameroon, who speaks in the ear of the chiefs? The wives and the mothers. Okay, so we do a lot of that and try to find those things. Sometimes what makes sense is, a reduction on taxes. You know, if we can work with the local governments or with the national governments, if you put that land in the name of both the couple, you'll get a reduction in your taxes. So that is sometimes the ways that we're doing this. More innovative ways is not only punishment, you have to do it, women have to do it. No, finding ways that culturally speaking make sense. And I think that is probably one of the big lessons learned on adaptation and mitigation. It needs to be embedded within the cultural system. Now, a lot of these ideas have not been marked as female or male in some of the communities, like masculine or feminine. The environmental sector has this incredible opportunity of bringing a project or initiative that nobody has done before, and then you can bring women and men as equals, as similar, to start a lot of this initiative. And that is helping a lot to implement some of these projects. Yes.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Paola, but I'm a fellow of World Learning here, and I'm from Nepal. And it's very good to know from you how you're born. I'm quite familiar with the project. So, I very inspired by your presentation, and I also confused that what is IUCN, you told about government can also be the member, and then non-government organization also can be the member. ICNL itself is the INGO or NGO, where it is registered. I'm confused. Yeah, it is confused. Number one. Number two, you are just, you also told that more than 60, international documents are there in regards of climate and gender, which are very supportive. So how SDGs, Sustainable Development Goal, how you are linking with the SDGs? That's two questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, the conflict of who we are is something that we still don't know. No, I'm teasing. We are an international governmental organization. That means that governments are members and civil society are members of IUCN. And this is a structure that has more than 70 years. So right now we talk about, civil society and governments together. That was a platform and that it was created. For example, the government of Nepal is a member of IUCN. But then you have local NGOs. As IUCN, we just acknowledged Indigenous Peoples Organization. 70 local indigenous organizations are now have a new category of members of IUCN. Everybody has a vote. Everybody has a voice. And that is very interesting when you have the general assemblies. Every 4 years, all the 2,000 and plus members of IUCN get together and vote what is going to be our program. It's a very interesting democratic process. So yes, there is now the willingness, as I said, more than 60 plus, actually we're now 70 plus decisions within the climate change framework that embraces gender equality. But most important, all the new financing mechanisms. Green Climate Fund, the GEF, the CIF, the Adaptation Fund, all have gender policies. Well, the Green Climate Fund, we are with the transition of the new one. A majority of them have gender action plans. And we as a team of IUCN, we have been supporting that process as well. So we have been working with the Convention on Biological Diversity, with the Convention on Drylands, with the Convention on Climate Change, with the financing mechanisms, so they can all, for the first time, find each other, and hopefully we're going to see more incredible things. And also, the initiative of USAID to generate this new knowledge, to bring these elements, as you said, people are working on fragility, people are working on vulnerability, people are working on gender equality. Let's bring them together and let's map to see if there is correspondence with them. That new knowledge is also fundamental for decision makers at national level that are still asking the how, that goes to the local level. And then people say, where do I need to invest? Why do I need to invest here? Here is a very clear map, and these are the reasons, and these are your entry points. So that is very useful in that sense.
We're going to take a question online and then we'll come back to the room.
Okay, so we have a question here from Kristin that says, I'm curious to know what types of unintended impacts, either positive or negative, you're seeing with these projects and how those are being addressed.
Which project? CCCAPs, climate change projects, the CC Gap.
I think the project identified in the CC Gap.
It's very interesting because sometimes it's not even at the level of projects. It's at the level also of knowledge that has been generated. And I give you an example of Bangladesh. We were working on Bangladesh and we start collecting this information that especially the women in the delta of the big river in Bangladesh, the ratio of eclampsia and preeclampsia, that is a high blood type of, event. I don't want to call it disease, but it's just a syndrome. I don't know, medically speaking, how you call it, was 30% higher than it was in the rest of the country. And this was due because of sea level rise. Women and men and boys and children, everybody was drinking saline water. But women, because of the pregnancy, had a differentiated impact. When we share that in the CC Gap of Cuba, the doctors in Cuba went ballistic and they said, my goodness, we're having exactly the same situation and we have never linked it to climate change and sea level rise. So there is a lot of movement. 25 countries in the world that has decided that gender equality is important. It's a major change. When we started in 2010, the head of the Climate Change Convention threw us out from the room because they said there's no linkage between gender equality and climate change. You guys are crazy. What are you doing? So we have seen a movement. We have seen a change. Probably adaptation embrace it more than mitigation. But little by little, we're generating more knowledge on this topic. Still a lot to learn, and that is precisely like this research that the team is conducting is fundamental to start every day making more the case of why gender equality matters, why it is important. Why it is important in some countries if you don't provide those initiatives to have the backpacks ready to those type of things does make a difference in the amount of women and men that die or are affected by disasters. And some groups that sometimes we are not even aware. I was, sharing with Corinne, we were now at the intersessional for the Climate Change Convention, and there is transgender group in Fiji that shared that during the disasters, they are not anybody from the lesbian, gay, or transgender community is not allowed to go to the refugees. They're being stoned because you're sick, you cannot sleep under my same roof. All these social, who was talking about social, cultural, embedded misconceptions. And a lot of them are drowning because they cannot even access the refugees. So all of these different linkages that we still don't understand are fundamental for what we're doing.
Hi, my name is Kristin. I work here at Chemonics. Thank you very much for this presentation. My question is really about the plants themselves, and obviously for a lot of natural resources and also climate impacts, they transcend boundaries, borders, et cetera. So I'm wondering how the CCAPs that are country, motivated or country asked for, how you take into account those types of impacts and mitigation measures for, a protected area that transcends more than one boundary or a river or things like that. Thank you.
Well, the advantage is that we are an organization that works on all those elements, watersheds, protected areas, coastal marine integration management plan. So when you see them, there is a lot of connectivity. And we're working also with the focal points for all the other conventions at the national level, because once you work at the national level and once you work at the local level, for example, the project on forest landscape restoration or landscape restoration is going to touch so many of these elements. Biodiversity has to do with issues of adaptation, has to do with issues of mitigation. Sometimes when you work at the local level, adaptation, mitigation, people don't understand very well where is the boundary and how it works. So we really need to have a more integrated approach to what we do. Yeah. And sometimes the entry point is climate change. Sometimes the entry point is protected areas. But they all, and that is what is important about the SDGs. They try to embrace as many SDGs as we can. And that is also something that we do the case and said, if you're going to have an activity, you're going to have X amount of money, where is better idea to invest it? In a type of initiative or project that touches more than one SDG, or in one that only handles one? So I hope that makes sense. Do you want to share, Ruta and Celine, the next steps on our adaptation study? What is coming? Coming soon?
Sure, yeah. So I'm Emmett Boyer. I'm a program officer at IUCN working with Lorena and Celine and Ruta on this adaptation project with USAID. As Lorena mentioned, right now we're in the literature review stage to try and identify those indicators that we can then use to map these three issue areas of climate vulnerability, state fragility, and gender inequality to find where geographically in the world these three issues really converge in this triple nexus. Our next steps are to develop the report, develop the mapping, and then work with USAID to find out what would be the proper interventions, whether that be adding on addendums to their existing climate risk management profiles for each country, or working with individual missions who we find to be on that top 10 or so list of countries that are most affected by these three issues. So it's a very interesting approach, and it's very there's not a lot of literature that kind of covers all three issues, so we're really interested in finding out where climate vulnerability and state fragility are either impacting and exacerbating gender inequality, or where gender inequality is exacerbating those issues.
So stay tuned to what is coming, and also the application, because we don't generate knowledge to be on a shelf. We really need and hope that this will inform NDCs, that it will inform the NAPAs or the LAPAs or the CAPs, depending on each one of the countries, that informs the investment of the Green Climate Fund or the GEF or the CIF. So really the idea, and this is something that we have tried in the work of IUCN, is that it generates movement, that it's transformative. That was one of the right eyes for climate change for us.
Great. Well, if there's no other questions, feel free to stick around, enjoy some refreshments and a cookie, and stay around and discuss anything. But I think we can give a round of applause to Lorena and the rest of the team. Oh yes, and we within usually a week we have the slides and the recording of the webinar posted online. So if you're on the ACM Adaptation Community Meeting listserv, you will receive that link. Thanks.